Not every animated film is destined to become a Frozen, a Toy Story, or a Shrek. For every beloved classic, there's a project that completely collapses when it hits theaters. Some were too weird, others too expensive, and a few were simply released at the worst possible time. Join us as we count down 20 cartoon movies that failed miserably at the box office. Some you might remember fondly, others you probably forgot existed for a reason. The Black Cauldron, 1985. Disney once called this the movie that almost killed the studio. And they weren't joking. The Black Cauldron was supposed to be Disney's big, dark fantasy epic, an attempt to push animation into more mature, mythic territory. Instead, it became a nightmare. With a budget of $44 million, making it the most expensive animated film of its time, it grossed only about $21 million domestically. That's less than half its cost. The film had knights, witches, and a terrifying villain called the Horned King, but audiences didn't show up. The darker tone alienated families who expected lighthearted Disney magic, and teenagers didn't take the bait either. Disney executives were horrified, delaying the VHS release for more than a decade to avoid embarrassing themselves further. While The Black Cauldron has picked up a small cult following today, back in 1985, it was a box office disaster that nearly shut down Disney animation entirely. Treasure Planet, 2002. Disney took a massive gamble in the early 2000s with Treasure Planet, a sci-fi retelling of Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. The movie blended traditional 2D hand-drawn characters with cutting-edge 3D backdrops. Technically, it looked incredible. Financially, it was a disaster. With a gigantic budget of $140 million, the film earned only $110 million worldwide. That might sound like a lot, but for Disney, it was considered one of the biggest animation flops ever. Domestically, it only made $38 million, a fraction of what they needed. Critics admired the artistry, but audiences simply didn't care. Released during the crowded holiday season against Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, the movie didn't stand a chance. Disney had hoped this would launch a whole franchise. Instead, Treasure Planet became a case study in how beautiful visuals don't always translate to box office gold. It remains a beloved cult favorite, but in 2002, it was a painful financial black hole. Titan AE 2000. What happens when you pour $75 million into a sci-fi cartoon aimed at teenagers? You get Titan AE, a film that lost so much money it shut down an entire animation studio. Directed by Don Bluth and Gary Goldman, the film was supposed to prove that Fox Animation could compete with Disney and DreamWorks. Instead, it bombed spectacularly, grossing only $36 million worldwide. The movie followed a ragtag group of survivors rebuilding humanity after aliens destroy Earth. It had a killer soundtrack and ambitious visuals, mixing hand-drawn and CGI animation. But the marketing struggled to target an audience. Families found it too dark, teens weren't interested in cartoons, and adults skipped it altogether. The failure of Titan AE was devastating. Fox Animation Studios was shut down soon after, leaving the film remembered less for its story and more for being the nail in the coffin of the studio. A cautionary tale of what happens when ambition outpaces audience demand. Osmosis Jones, 2001. Half live-action, half animated, and all confusion. That's the legacy of Osmosis Jones. Warner Brothers pitched it as a wild adventure inside the human body, mixing cartoon germs with live-action comedy. On paper, it sounded fun. In theaters, it was a dud. With a $70 million budget, Osmosis Jones grossed only $14 million in the U.S. Bill Murray starred in the live-action segments, while Chris Rock and David Hyde Pierce voiced the animated duo inside his body. Unfortunately, audiences weren't buying it. The tonal clash between gross-out live-action humor and zany cartoon antics left viewers puzzled. Kids didn't get the medical jokes, adults weren't interested in animated white blood cells, and the marketing campaign didn't know who to aim at. The result? One of Warner Bros.' biggest animated misfires. The film has since gained some fans thanks to its Saturday morning spin-off series, but in 2001, it was a colossal flop that studios would rather forget. The Road to El Dorado 2000. DreamWorks had already struck gold with The Prince of Egypt and was looking for another hit. Enter The Road to El Dorado, an animated buddy comedy about two con men who discovered the legendary City of Gold. With a star voice cast featuring Kevin Kline and Kenneth Branagh and music by Elton John, it seemed like a sure thing. Instead, the film lost millions. Its budget was around $95 million, but it only made $76 million worldwide. The problem? The film couldn't decide if it was for kids or adults. The humor was too mature for children, yet the overall style was too cartoony for older audiences. Creative disputes and delays only made things worse. Despite stunning animation and catchy songs, The Road to El Dorado became one of DreamWorks' biggest disappointments. Today, it has meme status online and a cult following. But in 2000, it was a golden opportunity that crumbled into box office rubble. Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron 2002. DreamWorks thought they had a masterpiece on their hands with Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron. This was no talking animal comedy. It was a heartfelt adventure told mostly through visuals, with minimal dialogue. Narrated by Matt Damon and backed by Bryan Adams's soaring soundtrack, the film had ambition written all over it. But the box office numbers didn't match the vision. With an $80 million budget, Spirit made just over $120 million worldwide. That might sound okay, but when you factor in marketing and distribution, the profits were razor thin. Worse still, this was the era when Disney and Pixar were dominating with more family-friendly comedic fare. Compared to Monsters, Inc., and Shrek, Spirit felt heavy, dramatic, and out of sync with what kids wanted to see. Critics respected the artistry. Many praised its hand-drawn animation blended with CGI landscapes, but audiences weren't rushing to theaters. Instead of kickstarting a franchise, it became a one-off that only later found redemption. Ironically, the film inspired the Netflix series Spirit, riding free years later, proving the idea had legs. But in 2002? Spirit was a financial letdown, remembered less for its box office performance and more for being a risky, misunderstood passion project. Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas, 2003. By the early 2000s, DreamWorks was on a streak of bold experiments. Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas was one of their riskiest bets. A swashbuckling fantasy with Greek mythology, exotic locales, and a voice cast led by Brad Pitt and Catherine Zeta-Jones. On paper, it looked like the perfect blockbuster. Instead, it sank. With a reported $60 million budget, the movie only managed to scrape together $80 million worldwide, which was nowhere near enough to break even. DreamWorks executives had banked on the film revitalizing traditional animation, but audiences just weren't interested. By then, computer-generated animation was taking over, and Sinbad felt old-fashioned, no matter how impressive the visuals were. The failure of Sinbad had long-term consequences. Jeffrey Katzenberg, head of DreamWorks, decided the company would abandon 2D animation altogether after its release. That meant no more hand-drawn epics and a total pivot to CGI projects like Shrek 2 and Madagascar. Critics were divided, some admiring the adventurous tone, while others dismissed it as forgettable. In hindsight, Sinbad has a small cult following, but at the time it marked the end of an era. One swashbuckler's failure was enough to close the book on DreamWorks' hand-drawn ambitions. Home on the Range 2004. Disney was in trouble in the early 2000s. Their traditional animation division had taken blow after blow, and Home on the Range was supposed to be a return to form, a light-hearted Western comedy featuring a trio of cows trying to save their farm. Sounds family-friendly enough, right? Unfortunately, audiences move-ed on. The film cost about $110 million to make and grossed only $76 million worldwide. That's a loss of tens of millions, and one that critics didn't cushion. Reviews slammed the movie for being formulaic and uninspired, especially compared to Pixar's breakout hits like Finding Nemo. Families didn't feel the same excitement they once did about Disney's hand-drawn features, and Home on the Range quickly earned the reputation of being forgettable. The financial failure of the film forced Disney to re-evaluate its entire strategy. Executives announced they would shut down traditional 2D animation in favor of computer-generated films. In other words, Home on the Range officially became the last straw. Today, it's mostly remembered as the film that ended Disney's golden tradition of hand-drawn animation, at least until later revivals. In 2004, though, it was less of a heartwarming farm story and more of a wake-up call that audiences were ready to move on. Strange World 2022. You'd think that with Disney's marketing muscle and global brand power, every release would be a guaranteed hit. Strange World proved otherwise. Released in 2022, it was positioned as a bold, original sci-fi adventure with environmental themes and a diverse cast of characters. Unfortunately, none of that translated to ticket sales. With a colossal budget nearing $180 million, the film only grossed about $73 million worldwide. That makes it one of the biggest animated flops in Disney history. Critics gave it lukewarm reviews, saying it looked great, but had a muddled story that failed to connect with audiences. Families weren't drawn in by the vague trailers, and older audiences didn't see a reason to go either. Disney also dropped the ball on promotion. The marketing campaign was confusing, with little to no clear explanation of what the movie was about. Some pointed out that it seemed aimed at older viewers nostalgic for pulp sci-fi, not kids, the exact opposite of Disney's usual strength. The result was a theatrical disaster. While Strange World has since been streamed by millions on Disney+, in theaters, it went down as a catastrophic misfire. Proof that even Disney isn't immune to flopping hard when a project doesn't resonate. Lightyear 2022. Pixar had a bold idea. Take Buzz Lightyear, the beloved Toy Story character, and give him his own movie. But instead of being about the toy, Lightyear told the story of the real space ranger that the toy was based on. Sound confusing? It was. And that confusion killed its box office potential. With a jaw-dropping $200 million budget and another $100 million in marketing, Lightyear needed to be a smash hit. Instead, it grossed just $226 million worldwide, resulting in an estimated loss of over $100 million for Disney and Pixar. That's shocking for a franchise as legendary as Toy Story. Part of the problem was audience fatigue. Families were confused by the premise, some wondering why Tim Allen wasn't voicing Buzz. Others felt Pixar was overcomplicating a simple, beloved character. Competition from Jurassic World. Dominion didn't help, and the marketing went into bizarre territory. Yes, Buzz Lightyear was even plastered on vegan bacon. While critics didn't hate the movie, they didn't rave about it either. It landed squarely in the just okay category, which isn't enough when you're dealing with one of the most expensive animated projects ever made. Lightyear became a rare Pixar embarrassment, reminding the world that even the studio's biggest names can crash and burn. Mars Needs Moms 2011. Disney has had some legendary flops, but few compare to Mars Needs Moms. Using the same motion capture technology behind the Polar Express, The film aimed to tell a heartfelt story about a boy rescuing his mother from Martians. Instead, it became one of the most infamous disasters in animation history. The budget ballooned to around $150 million, and the film grossed less than $40 million worldwide. That's a staggering loss of over $100 million, making it one of Disney's biggest failures ever. The creepy, uncanny look of the motion capture characters didn't help. Audiences found the lifelike yet robotic animation unsettling rather than appealing. Children were weirded out, parents weren't impressed, and word of mouth was brutal. Critics panned the movie for its thin story and awkward tone. Disney pulled it from theaters quickly, cutting their losses. The fallout was so severe that it effectively shut down the studio behind it, Image Movers Digital, which had been co-founded by Robert Zemeckis. Over a decade later, Mars Needs Moms still gets brought up as a cautionary tale about bloated budgets and misjudging audience taste. It's proof that no amount of money can save a movie that people simply don't want to see. Meet the Robinsons 2007. Disney was struggling to find its footing in the mid-2000s. Meet the Robinsons was meant to show they could compete with Pixar by diving deeper into quirky, fast-paced CGI family adventures. The result? A charming but uneven film that fell far short of expectations at the box office. The movie had a $150 million budget and grossed about $169 million worldwide. That might look like a win on paper, but with marketing costs included, it barely broke even, if at all. For Disney, which counted on its animated films to be massive hits, Meet the Robinsons was considered a disappointment. The film followed a young orphan inventor who travels to the future, where he meets a bizarre family full of eccentric characters. Critics praised its heart and creativity, but noted a frantic pace and uneven storytelling that left audiences divided. Families didn't connect with it the way they did with The Incredibles or Finding Nemo, both released just a few years earlier. Though not a total bomb, the film's weak returns signaled to Disney that they needed to rethink their animation strategy. Ironically, it also hinted at better days ahead, since Pixar officially joined Disney the same year. Bolt 2008. Bolt was marketed as the big return of Walt Disney Animation Studios, with a slick, modern look and an all-star cast led by John Travolta and Miley Cyrus. The story followed a Hollywood dog who believes he really has superpowers, only to discover he's just a regular pup. Heartwarming? Yes. Profitable? Not really. The budget was around $150 million, and worldwide grosses came in at $310 million. That might sound solid, but industry insiders considered it underwhelming compared to Disney standards. By the time all costs were counted, the ICO profits were slim, especially against Pixar juggernauts like WALL-E and Up. The movie had been plagued with production troubles. Originally titled American Dog, it was heavily reworked midway through after Disney's leadership changed. While critics liked the final version, praising its charm and visuals, audiences didn't turn out in the numbers Disney needed. Bolt wasn't a complete embarrassment, but it wasn't the triumphant comeback Disney hoped for either. Instead, it highlighted the growing gap between Disney's struggling in-house animation and Pixar's golden streak. The studio would have to wait a little longer for its real return to glory. Mr. Peabody and Sherman, 2014. DreamWorks tried to bring back a classic cartoon duo with Mr. Peabody and Sherman, spinning the Rocky and Bullwinkle characters into their own big-screen adventure. With time travel, historical gags, and a genius dog teaching his adopted son about history, it seemed like a fun family film. The problem? Most modern audiences had no idea who these characters were. The film's $145 million budget turned out to be a huge mistake when it grossed just $276 million worldwide. That may sound like a decent total, but after marketing and distribution costs, the film lost DreamWorks tens of millions of dollars. Critics gave it mixed reviews. Some appreciated its wit and cleverness, while others thought the humor was too scattershot. Families weren't sure whether it was for kids or nostalgic parents, and the movie ended up falling into a weird middle ground. The financial fallout was so severe that it contributed to DreamWorks laying off hundreds of employees shortly afterward. Mr. Peabody and Sherman is remembered today as a gamble that didn't pay off, proving that not every old-school cartoon character is ripe for a modern revival. Rise of the Guardians, 2012. On paper, Rise of the Guardians looked like a guaranteed blockbuster. It featured iconic characters: Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, Jack Frost, teaming up Avengers style to fight evil. DreamWorks spared no expense, spending around $145 million on the production and marketing it heavily for the holiday season. But when it hit theaters, the movie underperformed badly. Worldwide grosses reached $306 million, but insiders estimated DreamWorks lost $80 to $100 million once all costs were factored in. It was a devastating blow, especially since the studio hoped this would launch a long-running franchise. Critics weren't entirely unkind. Many admired the animation and praised its darker, adventurous tone. But audiences didn't connect with the characters, and the marketing struggled to explain exactly what the movie was. Was it a Christmas film? An action epic? A kid's fantasy? It turned out to be a little of everything, and that lack of clarity hurt ticket sales. The failure of Rise of the Guardians forced DreamWorks to take a hard look at its slate. Plans for sequels and spin-offs were scrapped, and the studio's financial troubles deepened. A film that could have been a holiday staple instead became a high-profile flop. Shark Tale, 2004. DreamWorks followed the massive success of Shrek with Shark Tale, a flashy undersea comedy starring Will Smith, Angelina Jolie, and Jack Black. On paper, it was a star-studded sure thing. In practice, it became one of the studio's most critically panned efforts. The movie had a hefty $75 million budget and grossed $375 million worldwide. While that sounds profitable, the backlash was intense. Critics slammed the film for its shallow story, awkward pop culture jokes, and reliance on celebrity voices instead of strong writing. Worse, DreamWorks had hoped Shark Tale would rival Pixar's Finding Nemo, but the comparison only made it look worse. Although it technically made money, industry analysts labeled it a disappointment because DreamWorks expected Shrek-level returns. The brand quickly faded, merchandise sales were weak, and no sequels were made. Audiences found it forgettable despite its flashy marketing push. Today, Shark Tale is remembered less as a success and more as an embarrassment in DreamWorks' early catalog. Proof that box office numbers don't always equal respect. Rock-a-Doodle, 1991. Don Bluth made a name for himself with heartfelt animated adventures like An American Tale and The Land Before Time. But with Rock-a-Doodle, he aimed for something very different. A barnyard rooster who leaves his farm to become an Elvis-inspired rock star. Yes, really. With an $18 million budget, the film grossed only $11 million worldwide. Critics were baffled by its bizarre story and uneven tone. Mixing live action with animation didn't help. Audiences found the hybrid jarring rather than magical. The financial failure was devastating for Bluth's studio, which had already been struggling after All Dogs Go to Heaven. Rock-a-Doodle became a turning point, signaling the decline of Bluth's once promising empire. Despite its failure, the movie has a small cult following today, thanks to its sheer weirdness. But in 1991, it was a flop so big, it helped derail one of the few competitors who had managed to challenge Disney. A Troll in Central Park, 1994. If Rockadoodle was a stumble, A Troll in Central Park was a full collapse. Another Don Bluth project, this whimsical tale of a kind-hearted troll with a magic green thumb completely bombed. Made for around $23 million, the film grossed just $71,000 in North America. Yes, thousand, not million. It became one of the lowest-earning theatrical releases ever for a major animated film. Critics called it cloying, shallow, and completely forgettable. Audiences ignored it entirely. The failure was so brutal it nearly ended Bluth's career altogether. Studios were reluctant to back his projects after that. And the film became a cautionary tale about chasing overly saccharine stories that failed to connect with either kids or adults. Today, A Troll in Central Park is mostly remembered as trivia for worst animated flops of all time. For Bluth, it was the nail in the coffin for his reputation as Disney's great rival. The Pebble and the Penguin, 1995. Another misfire from Don Bluth, The Pebble and the Penguin tells the story of a shy penguin in love, voiced by Martin Short, alongside Jim Belushi and Tim Curry. Despite a talented cast, the film's troubled production left it unfinished and rushed to release. Budgeted at $28 million, it earned less than $4 million at the box office. The losses were catastrophic, forcing Bluth's studio into bankruptcy. The animation was criticized as sloppy, the story felt disjointed, and audiences had little reason to show up. For Bluth, once hailed as the savior of traditional animation, this flop marked the end of his studio's independence. It also cemented his reputation as a risk too great for major studios to invest in. Though Penguins later found box office glory with hits like Happy Feet and Madagascar, The Pebble and the Penguin was a reminder that even cute animals can't save a poorly executed project. Food Fight. 2012. Few animated films are as infamous as Food Fight. Marketed as the Toy Story of the supermarket, it featured anthropomorphic grocery store mascots voiced by Charlie Sheen, Eva Longoria, and Hilary Duff. But behind the scenes, production was chaos. Originally planned for release in 2005, with a $45 million budget, the project was plagued by delays, technical failures, and lawsuits. By the time it finally limped into limited release in 2012, the animation looked dated, the story was incoherent, and the humor relied on bottom-of-the-barrel jokes. The box office? Just $73,000 worldwide. Critics savaged it, calling it one of the worst animated films ever made. Online, it quickly became a punching bag, ridiculed in YouTube reviews and listicles. Food Fight wasn't just a flop, it was a complete implosion. It's remembered today less as a movie and more as a case study in how not to make an animated film. So there you have it, 20 cartoon movies that aimed for box office glory but crashed harder than anyone expected. Some were too weird, some were too expensive, and some just picked the wrong moment to launch. Did we miss a flop that you secretly loved? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear your picks. And if you enjoyed this trip through animated disasters, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more deep dives into movie history. Thanks for watching.